Stress. It's not something we can avoid, reduce, or get rid of. In this video, Dr. Nicholas Hall will describe what it is and how to deal with it. Dr. Hall is a pioneer in the field of psychoneuroimmunology and an internationally acclaimed lecturer featured in numerous documentaries, including the Emmy Award-winning The Healing Mind by Bill Moyers. He will describe how family, friends, even pets and plants can promote recovery from illness. Learn why accepting responsibility helps you live longer and why exercise and imagery can help us to cope with some of life's challenges.
Over 30 years ago, a patient with severe cancer insisted that he be treated with an experimental drug called carbimazine. At that time, it was regarded by its proponents to be a miracle cure for the type of cancer that he had. After a single treatment, the cancer melted like snowballs on a hot stove, and within a very short period of time, he was able to resume nearly normal activities. He wrote an article that revealed that carbimazine was totally ineffective, and his cancer got worse. It once again began to spread. His physician told him not to believe the studies that he had read about, and told him it didn't really matter because he had a new and improved version of the drug. The patient took this new form of carbimazine and soon got better. The new and improved drug was nothing but colored water, and in 1957, a description of this case was published in the medical literature. This is a classic example of the placebo phenomenon, which has been studied extensively by the pharmaceutical industry. Sometimes over 30% of the beneficial effects of a treatment can be attributed to nothing more than a person's belief that the medicine will be effective. In fact, drug company scientists have discovered that certain colors are more effective than others, that the size, shape, even the taste can influence the effectiveness of a medication. This is why you see such a wide array of configurations whenever you go shopping for medication. There are two opposing viewpoints of what a placebo represents. It is true that in the context of testing drugs, the placebo phenomenon is a nuisance, something that can interfere with the assessment of a new medication. But the placebo phenomenon also serves as a very convincing argument that there is a powerful link between the mind and health. Psychoneuroimmunology is the term used to describe the links between the brain, behavior, and immunity. This book, called Psychoneuroimmunology, published by Academic Press, includes over 40 chapters describing the links between the mind and the immune system and how stress can interfere with a person's ability to fight disease. That is the topic that I will begin with. I will then describe how personality and other factors can influence health, and finally, some of the techniques that can be quite effective in dealing with stress. In 1991, Dr. Sheldon Cohen of Carnegie Mellon University published a landmark paper in the New England Journal of Medicine revealing that stress can make us more likely to catch a cold. The study was carried out at the Common Cold Unit in England. This was a place where people could go for a short vacation, all at the taxpayers' expense. The catch was, while they were there, they were asked to lie down while a virus that can trigger common cold symptoms was placed into their nasal cavity. They were never at a shortage of getting volunteers. Many people get sick when they go on vacation, so why not do it at the taxpayer's expense? Not everyone developed the same symptoms, though. Some people developed very mild colds, while others became very ill. Why the difference? Stress. Those people who were experiencing the most stress in their lives had the worst cold symptoms. Before I talk about why, I want to say a few things about stress so that you will appreciate how complex this subject can be. The word stress is used in many different ways. It is used as a noun, a verb, as well as an adjective. It is used by physicists, biologists, and sociologists, to mention just a few. We think in terms of people experiencing stress, but so can plants, and even inanimate objects. Here is a bottle of beer that was stressed in California during an earthquake. The label affixed to it says, "The alcoholic beverage contained herein is distressed. It was salvaged from fire, flood, wreck, or similar catastrophe." There are several ways of categorizing stress. For example, breaking a leg would be considered somatic stress, which is defined as trauma to the body. This is not the type of stress that is normally associated with impaired immunity, however. Chemicals are produced by the body which facilitate the repair of a damaged tissue, but spare our immune systems and our capacity for memory. These are changes that have been linked with severe emotional stress. I used to wrestle like this. Very painful. Psychogenic stress can be thought of as the anticipation of somatic injury and is the type of stress that can really take a toll on health, especially when the emotional turmoil persists for an extended period of time and gives way to what is referred to as chronic stress. For example, the years of suffering that those in prisoners of war or concentration camps may have endured would constitute chronic stress. Sometimes a person may not know what is causing their stress or anxiety. This can be particularly troublesome because if you do not know the cause of a problem, then you can only treat the symptoms. A phenomenon known as classical conditioning can sometimes be the trigger of stress. What is classical conditioning? It results when something that is neutral is associated with something that can cause an effect. It was first described by Pavlov, who recognized what all dog owners know, that the smell of meat will cause a dog to salivate. Pavlov then rang a bell whenever his dogs were exposed to meat. It wasn't long before just the sound of the bell was able to trigger salivation. The bell was referred to as a conditioned stimulus. Sometimes a conditioned stimulus in our lives will trigger not salivation, but anxiety. Imagine a doctor's office and picture a patient who has just arrived to receive chemotherapy. This intervention is designed to destroy rapidly dividing cells, such as those that comprise a cancer. The problem is that lymphocytes, which are the cells we rely upon to fight viruses and bacteria, are also rapidly dividing cells. So the trick is to expose the person to enough chemotherapy to destroy a maximum number of tumor cells, but spare the bone marrow cells which are needed to replace the damaged lymphocytes. The person is sitting in the waiting room, flipping through outdated copies of various magazines, looking at the obligatory fish tank over in the corner, because psychologists tell us that fish are soothing, occasionally glancing at pictures hanging on the wall. After about 20 minutes, it is time for the treatment. Now, this cycle of events may be repeated several times before the therapy is over. Several weeks later, the patient returns, not for more chemotherapy, but simply to make certain that the number of lymphocytes is increasing at a normal rate. The person sits in the same waiting room, looks through the same magazines, glances at the same fish, takes in the same pictures on the wall, and lo and behold, their immune system declines. Not because of chemotherapy, but simply as a result of having objects in the room previously associated with the treatment, having become the equivalent of a bell in Pavlov's experiments. What I have just described is not a hypothetical situation or speculation. I have paraphrased a research project that was conducted at the Sloan Kettering Institute in New York City, one of the foremost cancer treatment and research centers in the world. The study was precipitated by a large number of anecdotal reports that patients will sometimes experience nausea, a potential side effect of chemotherapy, upon returning to the hospital where the treatment was originally received. It might have been triggered by a billboard on the side of a road, or by the doors of the hospital, perhaps the taste of candy, or the music playing on the car radio while driving to the site of the initial treatment. Re-exposure, though, to these same cues may be sufficient to once again trigger a physiological response capable of diminishing the immune system. This is just one of many examples. There are others. You may not remember, for example, the song you were listening to when you received the devastating news about the unexpected loss of a close family member, or the food you ate just before a serious car accident. But as a result of the association, the song or food may thereafter trigger memories of the event without your even being aware of it. I should point out that in the example of the cancer patients, the effect of the conditioning upon the immune system is minimal, and by itself probably not sufficient to cause any health problems. But when coupled with the immunosuppression triggered by the treatment, it may be enough to affect a person's health. Too much stress can damage the immune system, which normally does battle with disease-causing microbes. Particularly susceptible to stress are the T lymphocytes, which can be thought of as the conductors of the immune orchestra. This is because they activate many of the other disease-fighting cells in the body. They are produced in the thymus gland, which is located beneath the sternum and near the heart. When these cells become damaged by stress, a person may be more prone to an opportunistic infection. What is an opportunistic infection? When you walked into the room and you placed your hand on the video player, you were exposing yourself to a number of microbial organisms, some with the potential of causing disease. If someone else happened to walk in before you, sneezed, and then wiped their nose with their hand just before touching the video player, then you were probably exposing yourself to hundreds of viruses. Rhinovirus, a cause of a common cold, or perhaps influenza, which can trigger flu symptoms. If you are feeling tired and have already rubbed the corner of your eye, then I'm afraid that your immunologic fate is probably sealed. That is because you transferred that virus to the equivalent of a Club Med. The moist area around the eye offers an ideal temperature and humidity for certain viruses to work their way into your healthy cells. As you sit watching this video, the virus is taking over the genetic machinery of those healthy cells, transforming them into miniature factories that will soon produce many more viruses. They in turn will go out and infect other cells. In about 3 days, you will probably feel a scratchy throat and start sneezing. The fact is, we are exposed to such things all the time. People sneeze on us, we transfer things into our bodies on the backs of forks, toothbrushes, even our hands. But we don't get sick. And the reason is because the immune system is doing exactly what it's supposed to do. It's dealing with the infection. The macrophages and monocytes, the so-called Pac-Men of the immune system, literally wrap their membranes around the invading particle and destroy it. You aren't even aware of it. You have what's called a subclinical infection. It's only when the immune system becomes impaired that some microbes now have the opportunity to proliferate, and it is for that reason that they are called opportunistic. They have the opportunity to cause problems for you, or, from their standpoint, to find a nice cozy environment in which to reproduce. Another opportunistic infection is triggered by the herpes virus. Over 90% of the population has been exposed to herpes, which can trigger fever blisters or cold sores. The virus normally resides in the ganglia of the trigeminal nerve. It is when you work a double shift, cross multiple time zones, or stay up all night working on a project that stress-related chemicals produced by the body can impair the immune system. This enables the virus to quite literally trot out along the nerve and manifest itself as a fever blister. As long as your immune system is intact, it can keep the virus under control. But if the immune system is impaired by stress, then fever blisters may very well result. Some classic studies have been conducted at Ohio State University by Dr. Ron Glaser and Dr. Jan Kiekolt-Glaser, a virologist and clinical psychologist respectively. They have demonstrated that herpes reactivation is far more likely to occur in medical students when they are taking major examinations. It can also occur in some people caring for those with chronic illness, such as Alzheimer's disease. Opportunistic infection is an example of too little immunity. But sometimes stress and anxiety may cause too much immunity, and when that occurs, autoimmune disease may result. An autoimmune disease is characterized by a normal immune response. The problem is that the cells of the immune system attack a person's own healthy cells. A dramatic case linking stress and this type of disease describes a 28-year-old Philippine-American woman who had been diagnosed with the disease called systemic lupus erythematosus. She was given drugs designed to shut down her immune system, but they didn't work. Her physician recommended a more aggressive course of treatment. He wanted her to take more of the drug and more often. She declined, preferring instead to return to her native Philippines, where she sought the advice of a local witch doctor. He removed a curse that had been placed on her by a former suitor, and when she returned to the United States, she exhibited none of the symptoms of her autoimmune condition. There are two things rather remarkable about this case, which was called witchcraft and lupus erythematosus. First, it was not published in the tabloid newspapers. It was published instead in the relatively conservative Journal of the American Medical Association, the May 15th, 1981 edition. Second, neither Dr. Patrick, the patient physician, and the author of the article, nor the editorial board of the journal questioned whether the witch doctor had succeeded where the practitioner of Western medicine had failed. The question posed at the end of the article was quite simply, by what mechanism had the witch doctor succeeded? This paper is sometimes offered as a reason why you should occasionally seek the medical advice of witch doctors instead of going to a Western-trained physician. In my opinion, this is wrong. First, it is highly unlikely that the witch doctor cured this woman of her lupus. It is more likely that she had a very mild form of this disease, which remained in remission for most of her life. It was only when she believed that a curse had been placed upon her that there occurred chemical and behavioral changes associated with a classic stress response, loss of sleep, a change in dietary habits, a change in her normal exercise routine, which resulted in chemical changes within her body that now enabled the symptoms to rear their ugly head. Chances are that had she followed the recommendation of her physician and taken higher and more frequent doses of the immunosuppressive drug, the symptoms would have gone away. However, this pharmacological approach would have treated only the symptoms of her disease. In this particular case, she was much better off eliminating the source of the problem, which, because of her cultural belief, required going to the witch doctor. Rather than being an example of the powers of a witch doctor over those of the Western-trained physician, this case is an excellent example of the power that the mind can exert over the course of disease. Many people blame stress for their problems, but stress is actually good for us. We need a certain amount of emotional excitement in order to avoid boredom. It's only when the stress exceeds our capacity to cope that problems arise. Consequently, it is not the stress, it's our inappropriate response that we should be focusing upon. There are many things that can influence our response, and I will now discuss a few of these, beginning with the concept of control. Imagine, if you will, 2 cages of rats. Each is identical. In the bottom of the cage is a steel grid through which a mild electric current passes. Inside each cage is a bar. Now, the rats in the cage over here can press their bar, and when they do, they turn the electric current off. They have control. The other rats, though, can press their bar until they're blue in the face. Nothing's going to happen because the bar is not connected to the electrical circuitry. But when the rats with control press their bar, they not only turn the current off for themselves, but they turn it off for their buddies as well. Guess who develops ulcers, has impaired immunity, and may be more prone to tumours? It's the ones who don't have control. The stress is identical for both groups. The current comes on at exactly the same time. It remains on for the same duration. The only difference is that these animals over here have control and the others do not. Similar studies have been conducted in humans and have revealed that when people have some measure of control, they can endure more discomfort, they make fewer errors when having to perform a task when they are stressed. The point of these studies is that it is not the stress that causes the health problems, but the feeling of being helpless, not having any control over events. Personality is also linked with health. Most people are aware of the type A and type B personalities. Type A's are time-oriented, always looking at their watches, feel guilty about taking time off, and often speak with a very rapid rate of speech. This type of person may finish your sentences for you as they become impatient, waiting for you to finish whatever it is you are trying to say. This is in marked contrast to the type B individual, who is really nothing more than a non-type A. A person who speaks with a normal rate of speech, who is not driven by the clock, and who takes time off to smell the roses. Originally, it was believed that the type A individual was more susceptible to cardiovascular disease than the type B. We now know that it is not that simple. Subsequent research has revealed that the emotions of stress, anger, and hostility account for most of the statistical variance explaining the link between type A behavior and coronary arterial disease. So, if you happen to be a type A, make certain that you are not angry and hostile. If you are, you might want to try modifying these behaviors. There is another type of personality called the cancer-prone or type C personality. This is the person who will subject themselves to a great deal of personal discomfort in order to please other people. The person who says yes when they really want to say no. In a clinical setting, it might be the patient who will wait until his or her throat is parched before asking for a glass of water, and then will apologize profusely for taking the staff's time, as opposed to that SOB in room 240 who is constantly demanding to know, why do I have to take this medication? Will it interact with the other medications I'm taking? And what do you mean waking me at 2 o'clock in the morning to give me a sleeping pill? The sort of patient who is typically labeled as difficult to manage. But do you know that it is the passive individual who is more likely to develop infections and certain forms of cancer? The passive individual was also characterized by Dr. George Solomon during the 1960s as being more prone to rheumatoid arthritis. Let's consider these personality types from the standpoint of control. The assertive individual, even though in a hospital setting really doesn't have much control over events, but by asking questions, they are involving themselves in the negotiation of their treatment and at least gaining control over a small component of the healing process. If nothing else, they are controlling their attitude. This is in marked contrast to the passive individual who turns over responsibility for their care to others, thereby abdicating their responsibility. By engaging in this behavior, they are acting like victims and reinforcing their belief that they are helpless. Remember, it is the feeling of helplessness and having no control that triggers health problems, as was quite evident from the results of the well-designed experiments I described. Social support is a wonderful way to deal with stress. It has been found to speed recovery from illness, as well as to reduce the potentially harmful effects of bereavement and even retirement. A study conducted in Alameda County, California, has revealed that people who are married, who have many friends, are healthier and have significantly greater life expectancies compared with single individuals. There are several explanations for this. A person who is married or who has many friends might pay more attention to their looks and therefore adopt healthier eating habits or spend more time exercising. It may also provide a means by which to practice altruism and love, which also promote good health. Now, some folks just don't like people, or perhaps you are divorced. Well, don't worry, because animals work just as well. In a field of study called animal-human bonding, it has been found that when animals are placed in clinical settings, patients recover faster from surgical procedures, they socialize more, and they become more compliant in taking medications. This might be a simple matter of providing order to one's life. For example, opening the refrigerator to take out a can of dog food might serve as a reminder to eat. Putting heartworm medicine into Rover's dish may be a reminder to take your own medication. And if you spend most of your time lying in bed or sitting on the couch, then getting up to let the dog outside may constitute a major aerobic workout. And we know that exercise promotes health. Of course, one cannot exclude the possibility that some people form very close attachments with their pets and need some bonding. They can be a bit of a nuisance, and if you happen to be allergic to their dander, that could cause additional problems. But don't worry, because plants are also effective. Dr. Rodin and her colleagues at Yale University reported that when plants are placed in hospital rooms, people recover faster from surgical procedures if they take care of their plant. They are responsible for moving the plant in and out of the sunlight and watering it, as opposed to these things being done by the staff. Now, unless one has had a frontal lobotomy, it's difficult to account for this on the basis of love and bonding. What is it that a vegetable, a dog, and a spouse all have in common? You may be able to think of many things, but in this context, the key word is responsibility. Responsibility for a plant, a pet, or a loved one. Let's take this concept one step further. Could it be that simply accepting responsibility for one's own health is itself a process that is conducive to a state of good health? The answer is yes. In another study conducted by Dr. Rodin and her colleagues, it was found that when people become involved in choosing their treatment, they have better recoveries than people who take the same medicine but without having been involved in negotiating their care. Recall my comments concerning control, because in this context, the concepts of control and responsibility are almost interchangeable. Whether we have a measure of control over our circumstances or accept responsibility for our destiny, the health benefits are the same. Having made the decision to accept some responsibility for your health, there are several beneficial things that you can do. Exercise is probably one of the course of exercise, heart rate increases, respiration rate increases, and there is an outpouring of stress-related chemicals. These are the very same changes that occur when you are faced with other types of stressful events. But unlike many of the things that happen to us in life, exercise is a type of stress that you have control over. You determine when it starts, you adjust the intensity, and you decide when it will end. Remember, it is when something exceeds our capacity to cope that it results in harmful consequences. Therefore, we can view exercise as an opportunity to train the body to deal with stress. This might be analogous to reaching into the overhead bin of a 747. That bag became as you crammed it with those extra souvenirs at the airport duty-free shop. If you have not been exercising, the lifting and twisting motion may cause serious damage to your lower back. That is far less likely to happen if you have strengthened those muscles through exercise. Triggering a short-term, moderate increase in stress chemicals through exercise, the cells of the body learn to adjust. So when that unexpected event occurs, they have had practice dealing with similar chemical changes. When you report to work and discover that you have been laid off, chances are your body will be able to handle it more effectively if it is used to dealing with stress on your terms. It has not been proven that this is why exercise is beneficial, but there is little doubt that exercise does serve as a buffer against stress. At least as important as exercising is allowing the body to adapt. In other words, teach the cells of the body to adapt to the chemical changes that occurred during the exercise. Instead of having an extended period of continuous exercise, with just one recovery period at the end, intersperse multiple recovery periods throughout the regimen. Maintain a certain level of aerobic activity and then slow down until your heart rate falls below the aerobic range. Then resume the more intense exercise and recover again. Keep repeating this cycle. The exercise regimen will last longer, but by doing it in this way, you will literally train your body to recover from stress. This, by the way, is the basis of a program that is used by Dr. Jim Lair, one of the top sports psychologists in the world. It is a program that has enabled world-class athletes to not only be healthier, but to better deal with the extreme pressure that they often face, and invariably at times when they are expected to perform at their peak level. It will do the same for you. This is the same basic philosophy that has been espoused in Ecclesiastes, the verse that begins, "To everything there is a season, a time to every purpose, a time to break down, a time to build up, a time to weep, and a time to laugh." In the context of exercise, there is a time for energy expenditure and a time for energy recovery. In addition to providing you with an opportunity to teach your body to deal with stress, exercise can have many other beneficial effects, one of which is facilitating the movement of lymphocytes. We all know about the circulatory system and its very powerful pump, the heart, but there is another conduit through which lymphocytes move from one part of the body to another as they seek out disease-causing microbes. This system is referred to as the lymphatic pathway, and you can think of it as being like a series of garden hoses, linking the various lymph nodes with each other and transporting disease-fighting lymphocytes to where they need to be. However, the lymphatics have no heart or equivalent pump. What enables the lymphocytes to move is contraction of the nearby muscles. As a result of exercising, various muscle groups are activated, which in turn facilitates the migration of lymphocytes. Now, this doesn't mean that you have to hand over $500 at the local spa and invest in an expensive running suit with matching shoes to maintain your immune system. When you get up in the morning and you yawn, you are getting exercise. When you get dressed and you pour that first cup of coffee, you are again getting exercise. And when you put the key into the ignition of your car and turn it, and arrive at work and press the button on the elevator, you are getting exercise. In fact, the amount and type of exercise that we get during the course of the day is usually enough to stimulate the efficient movement of lymphocytes from one part of the body to another. But it does stand to reason that if you do engage in a formal exercise regimen, that you are probably stimulating more efficient movement of lymphocytes along with the chemicals that help to achieve a healthy balance within the immune system. Any discussion of the beneficial effects of exercise has to include mention of nutrition. Our endurance to sustain physical activity is dependent upon both the amount and the type of food that we eat. In addition, exercise can influence the metabolism of food. I will introduce this topic by describing a group of wild baboons that have been studied in Africa for quite a number of years by Dr. Robert Sapolsky of Stanford University. When the animals were first observed, they spent between 30 and 40% of their day foraging for food, sometimes covering distances of several miles, searching for seed pods, insects, and other baboon delicacies. Their diet consisted of a very healthy group of foods, with meat comprising less than 1%. It was a high-fiber, low-sugar diet that enabled the monkeys to enjoy a health profile that would have made the most dedicated athlete green with envy. There was very little heart disease and no evidence of diabetes. But all of that changed. It changed when a dump was established in the middle of the animal's territory. Instead of getting up at 5 a.m. and covering several miles foraging for food, the monkeys began snoozing until 9 a.m. The only reason they got up at 9 is because they were awakened by the garbage truck. Exercise consisted of fighting over who was going to get the leftover Twinkie versus the leftover hamburger. There has been a 1/3 increase in their levels of low-density lipoproteins, the so-called bad cholesterol, and a 2-fold increase in their insulin levels, placing them at risk for developing diabetes as well as heart disease. As a result of changing their dietary and exercise habits, these animals are now prone to many of the same health problems that plague many humans who lead a sedentary lifestyle with similar behavioral patterns. Nutrition is perhaps one of the most important subjects in the context of health. While there are considerable data linking specific vitamins with the immune system and health, my focus will be upon general guidelines. First, don't worry about your weight. It's body fat which counts. Men are considered to be above a healthy state if their body fat is greater than 20%, while for women it is 27%. Second, worry less about the amount of food you eat and more about the type. According to Dr. Jack Groppel, an internationally renowned nutritionist who has advised some of the world's top athletes, 65% of your diet should be comprised of complex carbohydrates, with 15% as protein and 20% in the form of fat. This means eating more fruits, vegetables, whole grain bread, and pasta. Lean meats such as chicken and fish should also be on your personal menu. Avoid eating butter, creamy salad dressings, candy, and donuts. Red meat should also be avoided. But if you can't always select the ideal foods, at least prepare them in a healthy way. Broiled or grilled foods are much healthier than those that have been fried. And substitute fruit juices and water for soft drinks and alcohol. You should also adapt your eating habits to your lifestyle. Eating half a stick of butter with breakfast and 2 pounds of raw red meat for dinner is an ideal diet for Will Steger. Of course, this Arctic explorer eats that diet when he burns 5,000 calories a day guiding a 1,000-pound sled through 40 below zero temperatures. Most of us don't do that. Your goal should be to adjust your food intake to match your level of energy expenditure. It's also best to eat several small meals a day instead of 2 or 3 large ones. That will enable you to maintain a more stable level of blood sugar, which is the body's fuel. It determines your level of energy as well as your mood. You should also avoid a carbohydrate-rich meal if you need to be mentally alert later in the day. Research has shown that approximately 2 hours after consuming a carbohydrate-rich meal, you will be fatigued and unable to perform well on tasks that require speed and concentration. That's because carbohydrates can indirectly elevate brain levels of serotonin, which is the chemical that contributes to the induction of sleep. There is a considerable amount of advice available. What is important is that if you manipulate your diet or take supplements for health purposes, first consult with a registered dietitian or nutritionist. Some supposedly healthy regimens are not, and too much of certain vitamins can cause problems. Remember, no two people are exactly the same, nor do we have the same nutritional requirements. Consider available advice, but at the same time use your body as a laboratory and determine what works best for you, bearing in mind that eating is one of the few pleasures in life that is still legal. Massage is a wonderful way to counter the effects of stress, especially if it manifests itself in the form of increased muscle tension. It works by countering the effects of stress and also by offering an antidote from events that might be triggering the emotional upheaval in life. Some massage therapists claim that massage will boost the immune system through stimulation of the lymphatics. The rationale is that deep massage will manipulate the muscles adjacent to the lymphatics, thereby enabling lymphocytes to move more efficiently around the body. It is a wonderful excuse to give to your spouse when you get in the car and drive off to the local massage parlor, or to justify why a particular expense showed up on your credit card bill. But if you are on the receiving end of that argument, don't buy it. If your significant other can drive the car and then walk across the parking lot into the clinic, they are getting adequate stimulation of their lymphatics simply by being ambulatory. So whatever the beneficial effects of the massage might be, it is unlikely to be through stimulation of the lymphatics. That may not be true, though, for people who have limited movement, individuals who are quadriplegic, children with spina bifida, or others who are confined to a bed. For them, massage may serve as a viable alternative to exercise in stimulating the more efficient movement of their lymphocytes. There is also ample evidence from the University of Miami School of Medicine that touch and massage applied to premature infants can have far-reaching benefits. It can promote more rapid development of both the brain and the body. An intervention that has received an enormous amount of attention in recent years is guided imagery. It is a form of self-hypnosis that has been popularized in many books as an intervention that will promote health and even recovery from cancer. Usually, a person will imagine their medical condition and the gradual elimination of that illness. It might be an anatomically correct image, or it might be simply a metaphor of the illness. This is not something unique to the medical field or to patients with cancer. Athletes have engaged in mental preparation for a number of years. Archers may imagine the trajectory of the arrow as it leaves the bow and lands in the bullseye of a target. Pole vaulters will often move their eyes in visualizing each step as they approach the takeoff point, and then imagine clearing that extra inch to set the next record. Cancer patients engage in a similar process, except they imagine their natural killer and cytotoxic T cells, snuggling up to the tumor and injecting lethal chemicals into it. The images, in some instances, may be so anatomically correct that they might serve as illustrations in medical textbooks. In other cases, the image is all wrong. The person has the B cells, which normally make antibody, gobbling up the tumor, or the natural killer cells, secreting the chemical torpedoes, which we call antibodies. That's not the way it works. In the research that I have directed for the past 12 years, we have found that it really doesn't matter what the specific image happens to be, whether it's correct or incorrect. It is the process that is beneficial. We've even had people who have stopped the imaging because it served as a constant reminder that they had the disease. And these individuals, by continuing the relaxation component of the intervention, did just as well as those people who continued with the imagery. This observation would suggest that it is not the image, but something else that is having a beneficial effect. There are several explanations. Social support is often a consideration, as individuals in research study interact with each other, as well as the staff members carrying out the research. It was well documented by Dr. David Spiegel of Stanford University that women with breast cancer live longer when they participate in support groups. Furthermore, when a person believes that they are engaging in an activity that is going to benefit them, that expectation may be therapeutic, just as it is in studies of the placebo phenomenon. The person now has hope that things will be better. In addition, they are no longer in what psychologists refer to as a learned helplessness situation. By engaging in a behavioral intervention, they are part of the treatment process. They are exerting a measure of control. I'm not saying that the image can't work, although I am at a loss to explain how it is that one could enable a lymphocyte with specificity for a particular tumor to wend its way through the lymphatics and then through the bloodstream to arrive at exactly the place it needs to be. It's possible. I'm a firm believer in the old adage that absence of evidence is not evidence of absence. Just because I'm not clever enough to be able to explain how it might work doesn't mean that I'm ruling it out. While there is no scientific evidence that the image itself is beneficial, there is overwhelming evidence that engaging in the behavior of guided imagery is. Spirituality is missing from the medical paradigm that we have embraced. It is missing because it can't be measured using the accepted criteria of Western medicine. Even defining the concept is difficult. In ancient times, it was considered to be the opposite of the material things in life. In more recent times, it is most often equated with religion, and words such as faith, hope, and love are used to describe it. I define spirituality as an intangible force that enables us to cope with life's challenges. It can be derived from a belief in one's God or other external guiding force, or from resources within ourselves. Spirituality is the source of hope and the events that guide us, and it is also the process whereby we seek harmony with an unseen orchestration of events. The ability of spirituality to serve as a force capable of enabling one to overcome seemingly insurmountable hardship is evident in Viktor Frankl's account of how he survived a Nazi concentration camp. He had been a successful Viennese psychiatrist before being imprisoned, and subsequently became a living answer to the question of how it was that some prisoners survived disease and malnutrition while others succumbed. In a speech recounted in Harvey Mackay's Swim with the Sharks, he attributed his survival to one thing: hope. Why am I here today? What kept me alive was you. Others gave up hope. I dreamed. I dreamed that someday I would be here, telling you how I, Viktor Frankl, had survived the Nazi concentration camps. I've never been here before. I've never given this speech before. But in my dreams, I have stood before you and said these words 1,000 times. The source of Viktor Frankl's hope could not be quantified using standard biomedical techniques. His survival was every bit as great as any medication or surgical procedure could ever be. Love, trust, and altruism are also components of the spiritual process, and ones that should be given more consideration in our healthcare system. Unquestionably, much more research regarding the behavioral approach to illnesses such as cancer has to be done. In the meantime, the most immediately realizable applications of behavioral medicine lie elsewhere. In the long run, the most valuable of psychoneuroimmunology will be in disease prevention. Initially, in the development of ways to manage stress. As we study further the relationship between behavior and the biochemistry of immunity, the aim should not be to replace the witch doctor with a Western equivalent, so much as to reduce the need for both.